What if the most expensive mistakes in space development could have been avoided by studying century-old military strategy? Today's guest is Colonel Nicholas Moran, also known as the Chieftain, a tank warfare expert who sees patterns others miss. The reality is stark. Every major space company today faces the same crushing pressures that defined tank development in the early 1900s. Some nations revolutionized combined operations. Others built brilliant theories they couldn't afford to execute. Some specialized defensively, others scaled through mass production. Each approach created winners and losers that reveal everything about managing innovation under extreme constraints. Whether you're tracking space investments, building competitive advantage, or simply trying to predict where this industry heads next, these historical patterns offer genuine strategic insight. Because the next phase of space development isn't about getting there. It's about operating there. We need the space equivalent of patrol cars, emergency responders, and yes, tanks. Specialized vehicles designed for specific missions in humanity's most hostile frontier. The question isn't just how to build them. It's what they should actually do, how they should be configured, and what capabilities matter most when you're operating far from any support infrastructure. So what can these strategic choices from 100 years ago teach us about designing tomorrow's space fleet? And what could the best space tank look like? My name is Jason Canigan. I'm the founder of Cold Star Technologies, and I wanted to find out what is really going on in space and defense. So I started interviewing experts in the field, and over the past number of years have met with over 150 academics, engineers, business owners, venture capitalists, military, and government officials. I call this effort the Cold Star Project, and it's where you'll ride along with me to find out what is really going on in space and defense. Right. Right on. All right, we're back with Nicholas Moran. It has been 5 years since the Chieftain and I last talked, and I find that amazing, but at least he sort of remembers me. That's a good thing. So I
remember I said yes a few years ago, put it that way.
Right. Yeah. Well, you got deployed. You've been busy. You're a real tank colonel in the U.S. Army, so you have responsibilities. So I've been formulating what I wanted to talk with you about for quite a while, and you did a wonderful series, and I'm sure it took you a couple of years, looking at the development of tank doctrines from the point of view of various countries during the interwar period.
Yes.
And it was fascinating for me because as a kid, you don't think about logistics, you don't think about use cases, you just see tanks and think, they just roll around and go everywhere, right? And we don't have to think about engine overhauls, dust, oil,
or even the crewmen to man them.
Right. Yeah, they might get tired or not like it. They're not the most comfortable things, right?
Well, and the French problem is they weren't there because all the parents had been killed off, 20 years prior.
This is very true. So what I wanted to look at, and I went through all the videos, made my notes, ran it through AI, did a compare and contrast. It actually made me a chart. Now, I'm very good at using AI, of comparing things. And
because they're telling us that we should use AI more in the army, to generate orders or come up with options. I don't know. I think you will spend more time inputting the correct data into the AI.
Yeah.
Than it's worth to simply do it yourself.
Probably the first time. If you have a rubric that you could apply to solve a particular problem, we're pretty good. We could have another chat about that offline another time if you want. I'd be happy to share with you my experience because I hated AI when it first started. It had so many hallucinations, right? And just made stuff up. It was infuriating. But in the last 2 years, I've really used it. So
we're talking about using it maybe as a sanity check. What has AI thought of that perhaps you missed? Oh, right, yeah. So you're not using it for the answers, but yeah. Anyway.
Right. So what I wanted to do was have a look with you at the unique conditions of each of these countries as they're trying to figure out what to do with these tank things. And the pressures are different. It's the environment, the use cases are different. It's very strange in a way, right? Because you just think a tank's a tank until you start learning more. I guess it's true about opera or any topic, right? The more you dig into it, the more the details, the differences there are. And then applying that to how we might develop spacefaring vehicles like the space tanks of tomorrow in general, right? I don't expect you to know anything technical about space, but why not, right? We are certainly going to need law enforcement of some kind in space. And if a Chinese or American or a UN, an international, ooh, wouldn't that be cool? Space police cruiser can't pull up alongside, right? I just did a whole episode on space piracy with the guys who wrote this book. It's really much more real, and like they ran through a bunch of hypotheticals. They call it speculative nonfiction. And it caught my idea going. Like, I was thinking of, if you have a logistics system with drones sending stuff to the moon or something, cartels could infiltrate that. These are unmanned drones. They put their drugs in there, and now you've got a criminal element bleeding in. So very, very interesting. So we're going to look at, I think, German, British, American, French, Italian, Japanese, and Russian approaches here. And I'm going to ask you to remember what you can. I don't remember, expect you to remember every detail. By the way, were these videos done just kind of on your own time, or do you have to do research as a colonel, as an officer in the Army?
No, it was mainly my own time.
Okay.
The Army doesn't spend very much time on history. It spends some, obviously.
Yeah.
But if you're in a class for X many weeks, so I just came out of 5 weeks of battalion pre-command, and there's almost no history involved at all, because frankly they're cramming everything we need to know to do our job as battalion commanders in this small 5 week period. And so look, whilst history informs, it doesn't give us direct guidance as to how you do your job.
Right.
And it's kind of, okay, you're the commander. This is how you do a commander's visualization as you're instructing your staff how to do something. And up until now, I've only been on the receiving end. I've been the staff. The commander comes in, he gives his visualization, and then he leaves. And then we're frantically
how do we do this?
But what happens behind the curtain on the other side, I had no idea until I went to the course. But I mean, that's the mechanics of it, whereas history is more the art of it, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
But anyway,
well, I want to see trends here and highlights and stuff that we should be thinking about. So if we look at the British situation in the interwar period, they've just been part of the winning side of World War I. They were the developers of the tank, and it didn't work out quite the way that they thought. Now they're going into a period where the economy's not so good. They have financial hardships and constraints. They have a thing called the 10-year rule, where they're told, the planners are told, don't do anything that, like, don't assume we're going to have a major war for 10 years, right? And this really held everything back. So they've got this detailed theoretical tank doctrine, but the money side of it prevents its full implementation. So just speaking theoretically, Nick, if you had a highly compelling vision for an advanced, new, technically superior vehicle, but limited resources, what are the specific areas, like crew training, maintenance infrastructure, long-range deployment capabilities, things like that, would you prioritize to ensure that it could deliver a big operational impact despite these limitations?
Arguably in the 20s, the British were still the leaders in tank thought. I mean, in fairness to the 10-year rule, the last time they implemented the 10-year rule was about 1930. And so by the time World War II kicked off, the 10-year rule wouldn't have applied. So I think that is a little bit overstated. And there is certainly an argument for, don't waste all these resources on something that is going to be obsolete before it's needed. And as a counterexample, look at the Italians, but that's a different matter. So when the British were developing their vehicles in the late 20s, or they were one of the few to really put a lot of effort into it. So they had both private and government industry were working on this, similar to a large extent with the Americans. So the British Army came up with their list of specifications, and in the 20s, it was mainly, okay, Vickers, we want you to build this thing. It turns out to be the medium Mark II, or the Vickers C. The Irish bought the Vickers D, and it was basically private industry building to spec that the British Army wanted. And there's, I'll come back to the business of tanks in a moment. late 20s, they have the experimental mechanized force, which is effectively an armored brigade. And they're out in the field and they're trying to see just what can be done. Because one of the big limitations you have in the 20s is that whatever your doctrine says, and you got madmen like Fuller and Littleheart going out, we're going to do this fleet of tanks. It's kind of like, well, you can say what you like, but the vehicles can't do this. And the Soviets had the same problem with deep battle. It's a wonderful idea, but if you can't do it in practice, what's the point? So the British were very much trying to figure out what is even technically feasible. And in, I think it was the 1930 maneuvers, they added radios to the system. They realized, wait, this we're not quite working way we want it, but this definitely has potential. And so the British are doing a lot of this sort of experimentation. And the designs that they are putting out for both the army and export purpose aren't bad. Some of them are a little bit wacko. The Independent, for example, but that was a thing that lots of countries were trying to do with land ferrying battleships with multiple turrets pointing every sort of predecessors to Bolos, for example. But the private company as well, Vickers in particular, was doing great business developing tanks, Vickers and Gordon Lloyd, developing tanks or tankettes, because there is a political side to the tankette as well, which I'll touch on. And they were making things for just general export market. The Vickers 6-tonners were huge export successes, but not one was purchased by the British government, except maybe for trials. Because it simply didn't meet what the British really felt they wanted the vehicle to do. And they were perfectly serviceable tanks, don't get me wrong. But the other side of it was a tankette, Carton Lloyd in particular. And the nice thing about the tankette is that it looks like you get a tank for almost no money compared to a regular tank, because you don't have it's small. It's two people sitting side by side. Look at the British CV the Italian CV-33, the Polish TKS, they're all very similar, small little things. Sometimes they might have a turret, usually they don't. But it's armored, it's tracked, it has machine guns, and if you are the infantryman facing it at the other end and all you have is a bolt action 8mm Mauser or something, it's good enough.
Yeah, terrifying.
And you also can afford to buy hundreds of these things. So, you just, if you happen to be a dictator and you want to have a big military parade, well, there you go, you send these down. But even if you're not a dictator, if you're just on the idea that, we're in a fiscally conservative time and we need to do something, the Martel one-man tank suddenly looks very appealing. I mean, it's tactically useless, which is why the British never got many of them, but it was there. And so the British were always doing the industry side of things, were going one way. The government side of things was being a little bit more pragmatic about it. Good for them. But until 36 or so, when the British Army really decided, okay, let's start sorting things out, they were then hobbled by the realities of the industry, or lack thereof, that they had created. So the book I just mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it before, it's I keep it very close to hand, The Business of Tanks by MacLeod Ross. He has a bit of an axe to grind.
Yeah.
And he ended up spending most of the war as a part of the purchasing commission in the US. But before then, he was involved in the Department of Tank Design. And he has this list of flaws and failings that the British Army had in its procurement process, such as there was no Office of Tank Design, was the first problem. So you had the Office of Artillery, dealt with the guns, and the Office of Motorization or Transport, or whatever they had at the time, dealt with the motors and the engines. And they kind of went to a manufacturer and said, okay, we want this gun, we want that engine, make a tank. And and there was no engine actually designed for tank use either. So that's why they're still using Liberties, the World War I, basically World War I airplane engine modified to tank form, for a lot of the early war tanks as well. I mean, so some of them, they made sense. Like the Matildas used basically bus engines from London Bus. I can't argue it. They worked. I mean,
you need a lot of horsepower, to move weight.
And more to the point, they had a lot of reliability.
Yeah.
I mean, if these things are doing tens of thousands of miles a year around the streets of London, they can probably do a couple of 100 miles a year somewhere in Salisbury Plain. Whereas the Liberty engines were falling apart, and then you get the fun that they had in North Africa, in 1941, 42. So their biggest single failing was probably a lack of organizational structure on how to develop these things. Using them, the British Army were fine with the tests of tactical use, but in terms of technical design, they had no centralized function whose job it was to come up with this thing.
So where is the input coming from then to develop these, and how does that synthesize? There's a tough question
to figure out how this happens.
Yeah.
It does start with a government requirement. The government, pretty much similar to most countries, the government puts out, we need a thing that has these capabilities. What can you do about it? But the problem is partly that, okay, the artillery branch says, okay, you want a gun that has this capability, we're going to give you the 2-pounder. And engine branch says, oh, you want X many 100 horsepower, and you want this, this dimension or this fuel economy, we'll give you this engine. With no particular thought as to whether or not you can make a vehicle that fits everything correctly. And is usable correctly.
Oh boy!
So this thing gets assembled to the specifications and put out to the field, and again, it's partly what's available. It's got we're not welding our tanks because we rivet things. That's what we always do in this company. We've always riveted things, and we don't know how to cast and welding. Well, that's the shipbuilders. So we're going to give you a riveted, beautifully put together Mark 6 light tank or A10 cruiser or A9 cruiser, which again, to their credit, they tended to be reasonable at their job, at least as far as the test range was concerned. The problems occurred, the difference between on the test range and putting into service. Our tank is fine. I mean, you got a nice big 3-man turret, which is kind of rare, let's say on the A9 and A10. The engine's at the back where it belongs, with a rear drive sprocket. So not taking up room inside the vehicle like a lot of other tanks. The armor's a little bit light, but the doctrine says that we have to be fast. So we're going to be fast. And that's a decision. It's a valid decision. If it was right or wrong, is left to history. But there was a method to the madness. But when you suddenly put it in the mud in France or out in the desert, in the really abrasive environment, and that was one of the problems, is that because the British Army was focused so much on colonial stuff, armored divisions and the like are not useful for colonial policing. Home defense was dealt with by the Royal Navy because nobody was getting past the Royal Navy. So you didn't need tanks in the UK. So the only place left for them that there was any sort of a viable option to do large-scale armored warfare was Egypt. To their credit, they stood up a division out there, and they put Percy Hobart in charge before he became the great engineer of specialized vehicles. He was a very, very good commander of armored forces. And they knocked out a lot of their doctrinal issues and training issues in Egypt. But that's also where they start realizing, well, crap, Egypt is full of sand. Sand is, A, it gets in all your filters, and B, it's abrasive. And there's lots of moving parts in a tank. And the abrasive sand is not doing any wonders at all for the joints in our track pads or wheel hubs or anything else. Unfortunately, by this time, it's too late. They haven't figured that bit out yet.
Right. They've got it there. The same thing happened to the Panzers going into the Soviet Union with the unsealed roads, right? They get knocked out and have to ship the engines back to the Reich. So,
that's for the purposes of repair. The other catch that I don't know if the British could have anticipated this or not in the 30s, but after they got completely humiliated at Dunkirk and the army was left with very little, they had a choice between, okay, we need to start building things. We can either retool our factories to build really good things, but it's going to take a while.
Mm-hmm.
or we're in such desperate straits that we're just going to turn on the taps and what we have right now, and if it's not great, it's better than nothing in the next month and a half or 2 months. And that's, for example, why the 6-pounder anti-tank gun, which is an outstanding anti-tank gun, the Americans ended up using it as 57. It was ready for production before Dunkirk, but after Dunkirk, they just, we need anti-tank guns right now, and if they're not great, so be it.
Yeah. Something. Okay. So what you're saying then is a systems thinker needs to be in charge of this planning, to synthesize everything, to make the sizing right, all the parts work together well. And that's what was missing from the British side here.
That is certainly McLeod Ross's argument. And I think as far as it goes, it is correct.
Okay.
There are other parts of the book that start getting a little bit questionable and squishy, but that part of it, I don't think he's wrong.
Okay. So is that what you would recommend people designing a space tank do, is have that central office in the Space Force to do this?
If you decide that you do need a tank to do it, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, we can go into how let's say the U.S. Army does it today with program managers and the whole JSIDs and .MLPF processes. I don't know if you've covered those or not, or even I covered it last time I was on.
No. We talked about your research, how you do research for the tanks, right? Going to the archives.
Yeah. Are you familiar with .MLPF?
Not me. Okay. But I can look it up. Once I know it exists.
We're getting it. So JSIDS is the Joint Capabilities Integration something system. And .MLPF, so JSIDS is what capabilities does the unified force, Air Force, Space Force, Army, Navy need as a whole? And if you have the capability of that need from, let's say, the Navy can do something the Air Force can't, can you just borrow ask the Navy to do it? If the answer is no, you don't, and you have to develop an entirely new capability, then that's what .MLPF is. So it's doctrine, organization, training. I can't remember what the L is offhand. Logistics, probably material, personnel. So is your doctrine wrong? If you have all the stuff that you need, but you just using it incorrectly, can you solve your capability gap? Organization. Well, let's say your doctrine is more or less right, but you just need to have more artillery pieces in the armor division. Well, that'll solve your problem. Training. Well, we have all the things that will work for it. Just nobody knows that this gadget, if you turn it sideways and push this button, it'll do the job. Okay, we'll fix it with training. So only when you get down to the M, materiel, is it a case that, okay, we need to make a new thing because training is a lot cheaper and easier and faster to fix than materiel. Well, doctrine is easier and faster and cheaper to train. I mean, that you're just rewriting the manual. Great. You've done it. So once you have decided you need a thing, then you have the procurement process, which starts in the Army under a program manager, which is a subdivision of a program executive office. And that one program manager, he's like the Army's single point of contact, that everything that happens to this vehicle is his problem. And that's both dealing with the private industry or the Army's own arsenals of production, because the Army owns factories. It sometimes operates through contractors, but it owns factories. Anyway, that's a bit of a digression on how we do things today.
No, very, very valuable knowledge there. Would you prefer right now, if we were to build a bunch of these space cruisers or tanks or whatever, a less capable but bigger fleet like you were talking about, like let's build something now? Or would it be better to wait and have better capabilities to work with?
I think that depends very much on the volume of space you're talking about.
Okay.
I mean, why that argument strikes me as something that, let's say, Coast Guards around the world are dealing with right now. I mean, do you want little 50-footers, or do you want large cutters with helicopters on the back and whatever else?
Right. Yeah, because like every time I go to the Imperial British Navy, I think like 2 ships are covering thousands of square miles here. Like, how do they do it? Right? You have to have a pretty good intelligence network to know where to go.
Well, you don't have to get everything. You just have to have enough of a threat that there is a sufficient deterrence.
Right.
That, okay, this ship is here. what's the chances that it's going to hit me? So maybe, I don't know, maybe the bad guys have to send two things at one time because the opposition can only be one. But that requires organization. If you have more organization, then maybe there's a chance of an intelligence leak, signals intercept, something like that. So again, you don't have to be everywhere. You don't have to have a capability to do everywhere. It just has to be good enough and frequent enough. Because again, your other problem is money.
Right.
I'm sure space tanks, bolos are going to be expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe we can build them in orbit. That would be very helpful. All right. Well, let's move on to Germany then. So they had this focus on combined arms and innovation. Their early tank doctrine is emphasizing that the different military branches work together, and can we adopt as fast as possible all the features we can, right? So and they were the ones who really used radios very well, and I think each tank had like 3 radios in it, right?
Well, not that many.
Yeah,
but
one for the crew, one to talk to everyone else, and then one to go back to headquarters, I think.
But what made the Germans different is that they were a self-critical organization. So it's the old Prussian school. So the French came out of it and said, "Oh, we have won the war. What we're doing is obviously correct, and yeah, there's no point in looking. We're right." Whereas the Germans are looking at it, going, "Okay, that didn't work out. Let's see if we can figure out why and what the actual answer is. We're not just going to copy the French. We're not going to assume that because the British had tanks or the French had artillery, that they were correct. We're going to start from first principles, and let's see what without preconceptions. That's, well, at least officially without preconceptions. I'm sure there were some. Let's see what we do. These are the reforms started by von Seeckt in about 21-22. And so they went back, this massive team of several hundred senior staff members, which is basically at this point, because of the Treaty of Versailles, the vast majority
that's amazing. They're not allowed to have a general staff at this point, right? Like college, a war college.
But they do still have a lot of officers, so they put them all to work on this assessment. I guess without much of an army, they didn't have much else to do anyway. And they concluded, okay, it didn't work out this time, but our techniques do seem to be the greatest chance of success, and that's Bewegungskrieg, the maneuver warfare. So yeah, I mean, you can try battles of attrition, you can try slugging it out, you can try firepower, but ultimately, maneuver is what wins, because that's what gets you from A to B. And especially if you don't want to do a war of attrition, you're having a choice in the matter. You got to do maneuver.
Right.
And Germany has never been a huge believer in the concept of a war of attrition, at least in theory. In practice, things got a little out of hand, but that's another matter. So there, for the next 10 or 15 years, it all became down to, well, how do we regain mobility and maneuver in the field? Because ultimately, you do still have the slight problem that the French have a lot of guns.
Right.
They have a lot of anti-tank guns, they have a lot of artillery pieces.
The Maginot Line.
and the Maginot Line.
Yeah.
And so the way they restore mobility is through the internal combustion engine. And the best way of doing it in combat with an internal combustion engine is to put armor on it. And well, the best way of getting the armor around is tracks. Okay, we're going to use tanks.
To just get there.
Yeah. And of course it still needed tweaking. Like pretty much every single country that started making armor divisions or armor brigades went too heavy on the tanks. They'd have like two battalions of tanks to one of infantry and maybe a battery of guns of artillery. Or some units had no infantry at all. The French armor divisions, the Soviet some of the tank brigades, no infantry at all. It just kind of, this is a shed ton of tanks. Now, in the French concept and the Soviet concept, these were going to be reinforcing units to, it's almost like a corps or an army level asset that will be divvied out. But they went a bit heavy, but like everybody else, after a little while, they figured out, okay, we need to work on the balance a little bit and go back. But if you look at the specifications that they had for what they wanted their tanks to look at, the very first thing that they had on their list of requirements was not we want a big gun or we want a big armor. The very first thing on the list was we want a good radius of action. So we want to be able to get from A as far as possible to B without stopping for fuel. or the crew getting tired and having to fall asleep or things like that.
Huh.
So speed and distance is what they wanted first and foremost. Their second characteristic that they wanted was division of labor amongst the crew. So unlike some other countries that were, okay, well, we have big armor, we got a big gun, yeah, we'll just let the guy inside do it all. The Germans, okay, look, we're going to have a funker just for the radio. We're going to have a driver just to drive. We're going to have a commander. He's not going to touch the gun. He's just going to command
Right.
the whole tank. We're going to have a gunner do the touching of the gun. Things like that. So this is the specs for the Panzer III, obviously, because 1 and 2 was almost a matter of
Yeah, one was like the little mini tank you described.
Yeah,
earlier.
what can infantry what can we actually build?
Mm-hmm.
So the Panzer One was small,
Yeah.
not necessarily because of political reasons or cost cutting, but it was quite simply they looked at their factories, they looked at what they could build, and said, right now, if we wanted to build something fast, reliable, usable, it can't be bigger than the Panzer One. And then eventually, after the Spanish Civil War, they realized maybe we need a bigger gun. So what can we do to the Panzer One design? And if you look at a Panzer Two, it's incorrect to say it's a larger Panzer One, but it's a larger Panzer One to many extents. And so as industry got better, the Germans became went with larger, more capable vehicles. Eventually they lost the plot and ended up with King Tiger and the Egg Tiger.
The elephant.
But that was that was the politicians getting involved in the realm of doctrine. And the Germans again, they said, look, we have this need. We need a breakthrough tank, the Durchbruchswagen, which eventually becomes Tiger. And Tiger has its limitations. It's not the all-winning tank that some people think it is, but it was designed for a specific purpose, and it was very good at that one purpose. The only problem was by the time it hit the field, the war had changed, so that purpose was no longer particularly viable. You can make arguments then as if your requirements process is too slow or incorrect, have you made a good tank? And well, that's an entirely different argument, but
okay,
that's why people get paid more money than me to deal with these problems.
So how would you make sure then that the organization producing these space tanks has this culture of continuous trial and testing like the Germans were using?
That unfortunately becomes a political question. So one of the things that I remember, you remember when the North Koreans were doing all their tests maybe about 5-6 years ago, and they kept blowing up on the pad? And some people are laughing at them going, hey, look at them, they're wasting money or whatever. It's kind of like, I'll bet you they're learning.
Yeah, that's how
eventually
SpaceX did that, right? SpaceX did that. Yeah.
But heaven forbid a U.S. military procurement program should fail a test. I mean, it's like, oh, this THAAD interceptor missile didn't hit the inbound rocket, exothermic, was exoatmospheric. And we'll have congressional hearings now as to why we spent billions of dollars on a missile that can't hit an inbound missile, despite the fact that what they're asking you to do is not exactly easy,
right,
or cheap. So the U.S. has a culture to a very large extent of no failure is allowed, even if it's the scientific method is experimentation and trial. So I would say probably the very first thing to do is make sure that there is a culture that allows tests to not work. As long as there is a culture which says even if the test doesn't work, we have a way of analyzing it and assessing what went wrong and incorporating the lessons learned. That's okay.
Right. And I mean that sounds very sane.
It is, but it's politically utterly unacceptable.
Right.
At least in an environment where the political leadership is directly answerable to the populace. As one of the advantages that the Soviets and the Germans and the Italians had in World War II and to an extent the Japanese, was that they didn't have to really answer to the people. It's kind of like, I want to spend a ridiculous amount of our budget on building an air force and a tank force out of nothing. Done.
Right. It's funny choices. Okay. Let's move on to France. Now, France gets a bad rap for what happened in World War II, and France is selling a gun. It's only been dropped once, kind of thing, right? And that's bad.
Oh, it's
Like
totally wrong.
we need to turn that around. They got into a pretty tough situation there and didn't have great leadership at the time. But the men and the materiel they had were pretty good. Now the leaders were not stupid. The World War One doctrine was about offensive. That means you need firepower and lots of it and coordination, right?
Yeah.
So they redesigned their military to win a national war. They're not doing small battles anymore. And they don't want to trade ground for time because their industry's in that area where the Maginot Line's in front of it, right?
Right.
This is all stuff I learned from your your video here. I took a lot of notes, right? But they keep having this political instability. They're afraid of a coup, right? And that really slows things down. So when you're in that kind of a situation, what does that do to the development of your tank doctrine? Tell us a bit about that.
The the whole thing about the political instability is partly a bit of a red herring. So what it did mean is that the French could not have a large cadre or even a reasonable sized cadre of professional soldiers. So the idea of staffing the Maginot Line with conscripts is fine because you're sitting in a bunker. All you need to be able to do is call for fire and fire your machine gun or whatever else. So having an army which is predominantly conscript based is not a problem. And especially when the French are going, okay, this is a war of national interest, which actually led to some political problems because when the Rhineland was remilitarized, the correct answer would have been, okay, we will send a small force to kick the Germans back out again in accordance with the treaties. But the French basically said, look, we don't have that. We can either mobilize for total war or we do nothing. They didn't leave themselves an option in the middle.
Huh. And Hitler was like, yes, because he was rolling the dice.
We've got a gap here, and he made a correct gamble. And of course, the British weren't in a position to do it either. So when somebody did say, look, okay, we got the Maginot Line down the south, and there's going to be more mobile warfare happening up north. And so to a large extent, the French were very much into mobile warfare. If you look at all the divisions, both cavalry and regular army, that were slated to go into Belgium, the whole function of these things was to get there quickly. So they're all motorized. They're all got tank transporters and anything else to get to where they needed to go. To say that the French were purely static is very much a misconception. And the other thing is that when the French doctrine was applied, it tended to work. It wasn't applied very often because of the idiocy of some of the senior commanders. But at places like Hanout, the Gembloux Gap, Panzer Division runs up against the French unit and just gets stopped hard. It's got we have never seen such, even in the Great War, we never saw such shelling. So the French theory wasn't wrong in and of itself. But again, this is simply a reflection of the situation. So just as you mentioned, the resources they couldn't fight a mobile warfare anywhere outside of Belgium. They weren't allowed to have a standing professional army. They didn't have much manpower, which is part of the reason for all the fortifications, because you need fewer manpower for the fortifications, and even the tanks. Well, we can build a tank. We can build 100 two-man tanks and crew it with 200 people, or we can build 50 four-man tanks and crew them with 4 people. And yes, a 4-man tank might be better than a 2-man tank, but is it twice as good to actually warrant it?
This is a fall off chart. Huh.
Yeah, basically. And so the French decided, no, it's not. I query if that was the correct answer, but at least there was logic and rationale behind it. It wasn't that the French were, just completely out there. So the other catch they have with the conscription, though, is that if you have a conscript force that shows up for training every other year, I think, or whatever the cycle was for the French conscripts, if you change your doctrine, everything everybody knows is wrong and will not be changed until they finally cycle around for the refresher training. And you may not be able to inculcate the new doctrine into 2 weeks or whatever it has that you have the lads for refresher training. And an interesting example of this has been the Finnish army. So when Finland conscripts people, they conscript people to equip certain equipment, and they will stay with that equipment for the duration of their time in service. So, unlike a lot of other countries, let's say the Americans decide that the M60 tank is obsolete, we're going to replace it with M1s, and we're just going to retrain everybody to use M1s. The Finnish are going, okay, the T-55 is obsolete, or the T-72. I think they got rid of those first, actually. T-72 is obsolete, but we still have X many thousand soldiers in the force who only know how to use the T-72. So we're going to keep the T-72 until these soldiers hit the age of 40 or 35, or whatever it is that is the termination of their term of service. When the reservists go away, the conscripts go away, then the tank will go away. And when we get this new tank, the unit that's going to use this new tank are going to be fresh conscripts right out of boot camp, because they don't have to be retrained in anything, and they're going to stay. Hopefully the service life of this new vehicle is going to be the same as the service life as the crewman. Whereas a lot of other countries, they will give the new stuff to the elite units or the bet or whatever. So it's like the battle days of the National Guard, for example. Is active duty got the new stuff first, and then eventually will cascade down to reservists.
Okay.
Which again has its merits, because active duty is probably more likely to be used than the reservists. But that's a larger political discussion on what is the purpose of a military reserve.
Right.
So the French were limited into what they could do, even by changing the doctrine, by the simple fact that they had a conscript force.
Right. They've got this huge anchor that's dragging along, making them slow to change. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. That's very. How do you make long-term plans like that then, other than the shuffling that you're talking about, and thinking in 10-year chunks or something like that, right?
Any sort of major change like that you've got to put a bit of money behind it. And conscription is a cheap force. Reservists are a cheap force, but there comes a point of diminishing returns. That if you have the equipment but you only pay for the people 1 day a year, what have you got? So depending on how much effort you want to put in. So as I said, I spent 5 weeks in Fort Leavenworth. 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, supposedly. No, I just spent 5 weeks in Leavenworth learning my new job. So it's not that part of Leavenworth that you go if you're bad. But so
there's a good side.
So the U.S. Army is actually very good about putting additional funds for training for reservists. And actually what they did just before World War II was they even cut down the length of some of the courses to make it more accessible to reservists. So one of the command and staff courses used to be, let's say, 6 months long, and all the active duty soldiers loved it because they're getting lots and lots of training and they're very, very good at this. But almost no reservists could attend because it was 6 months long.
Yeah, who's going to take their time away from their job and their family, right?
But McNair is looking at this going, look, hang on a second. According to my org chart, of the 20 divisions in the Army, 13 of them are reservists. When we go to war, most of our fighting power are going to be the people who could not go to this ridiculously long course. So the answer he said is, look, let's make the course less capable. Let's collapse it down. Okay, the active duty guys won't be happy, but at least the reservists can attend. And so most of our fighting force have a grounding, perhaps not as good as if they've been able to go for the full 6 months, but
we can trust that they can do these things.
They can at least not fall flat on their face.
Right. Super important. Okay, so taking this kind of chosen and experienced constraints that the French had, and applying it to making space vehicles and having a space force, right? If we were in a situation like that, so that you're talking about personnel training and capabilities and how they're rolled out. These are all factors that we have to think about. We can't just start throwing stuff up there and going, all right, let's use it.
Well, by this point, how good is AI is the other question, because that's going to affect your manning requirements. So we are starting to get to the point that, and again, this has been foreseen by sci-fi writers like Laumer, that even today, an AI, a computer, can do a lot of things better than a human crewman.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing it can't do, I mean, it'll shoot faster, it'll shoot more accurately. It might be able to take information from multiple sources and give you this is what it is faster than you could do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But what it can't do is answer the question, at least not to the level of a human yet. Okay, that's the situation. What do I do about it?
Yeah.
So even if it just takes one person sitting in the command module of your space tank / Coast Guard cutter / whatever you want to call it, and all he does is he makes the decision, board this ship and ignore that one. And the computer does all the rest of it. It calculates the intercept vector, it fires the warning shot across the bows, it goes in and attaches the docking mating collar, whatever you want to call the thing.
Yeah.
The computer can do all that without words. So I strongly suspect that the manning issues are not going to be actually all that much of a concern in your space hypothetical.
Okay. Interesting. I just before this interview today, I interviewed Joel Moser, who was the chief scientist of the Air Force and Space Force, retired a couple years ago, and we talked about this. We talked about the OODA loop and AI, and not having the personnel be passengers, basically, and having AI do the selecting, the choosing of targets and actions and things like that, right? And then the humans going and implementing. We want it to be the reverse as much as possible. Interestingly, I was chasing him for 5 years to be a guest as well, and you both were available on the same day.
Your lucky day.
It's astonishing. Yeah, maybe I should go play the lottery or something like that. Okay, very, very cool. All right, let's look at the Soviets. The Soviets are really an interesting case, right? They're kind of by themselves. They're going through this. The Civil War, right? Are getting the Reds to take over everything. There's a lot of chaos, right? And they've got this revolutionary ideology and red interference in theory, right? That's going on. They're talking about deep battle and deep operations, envisioning these huge, deep mechanized assaults with multiple tank echelons moving forward with artillery and airborne troops and that. And yet they don't have, and I talked about this in my Albert Kahn episode, they don't have the factories to produce anything at all. They don't produce tractors very well. Right. And then though, as we're getting towards World War II, they have had combat lessons. They were, sticking their nose into the Spanish Civil War, just like the Germans, and had the Winter War with Finland. And they're like, oh, we have a serious problem with our doctrine here. So let's talk a little bit about that pre-Barbarossa reality and what the Soviet doctrine was like.
Well, so it is, I guess, somewhat possible to overstate the influence that the ideology had on the doctrine. So there was always, you had to be very careful how you wrote something that made sure it matched with the doctrine of, we are going to, the purpose of the Red Army is to support the popular uprising of the proletariat in these imperialist bourgeoisie countries next door to us and so on. Didn't work out very well in Poland. It turned out that the proletariat weren't very interested in uprising against Rome bourgeoisie opponents in the first place, right? 1920s Poland. But that didn't mean to say that they weren't allowed to actually sit down and do some serious thinking about how they were going to do this attack forward to relieve the pressure on the oppressed. And so, as I say, they did come up with deep battle in the 1930s, and operationally, it was. I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. It's a sort of operational art that we strive to achieve today. In fact, operational art is a term from Soviet 1930s. They come up with it. Prior to that, we tended to think just strategy or tactics, but linking them together in operations and operational art wasn't really a thing at the time. But they come up with the concept, and as we just say, it doesn't work. So it actually stays official doctrine only for 4 or 5 years. And there were two problems. First, again, it doesn't work. And secondly, the people who proposed it were ideologically not on Stalin's side, and they disappeared.
So.
And so if you if you express any support for the doctrine in theory, even,
Hmm.
regardless of whether or not you realize that they could do it in practice, but let's say you had invented vehicles that were reliable enough to do the job, and then you attempted to advocate for deep battle, you would still be purged because you're associating yourself with an enemy of the state.
Right.
So that
Careful
probably put
now.
a little bit of a limitation
Yeah.
on innovation. But so the Spanish Civil War kicks off, and the Soviets are taking almost no lessons from it at all,
Hmm.
mainly because they don't need to. So the vehicles that they put out, the T-26 tank and the BA-6 armored car, was destroying the Panzer I with fair impunity because the Soviets had decided, let's put a proper gun on our vehicles.
Hmm.
So on the tactical side, as far as they knew, the T-26 was working fine. And being a derivative of the Vickers Vickers 6-tonner, it was fine. It was a reasonable tank by 1936 standards. But on the operational side, on the doctrinal side, everybody, the Germans, the Soviets, the Americans, they're all looking at what's happening in Spain, and they're realizing that they can't take any lessons from it because nobody in the battlefield is fighting the way that they would fight themselves. None of them are using
Hmm.
the deep battle concept, the
Right.
Bewegungskrieg concept, the American, yeah, we'll talk about them in a minute,
Yeah.
concept. So the Spanish Civil War, it did have lessons, it did have tactical lessons, it didn't have many doctrinal lessons, except maybe for the Luftwaffe. You can make an argument for
True.
that.
Yeah.
So something similar happens in against the Japanese. So the Soviets do get embarrassed initially, and it does take them a little while to sort themselves out, and they realize that, and to their credit, they sort themselves out, considering the distances involved, relatively quickly, and they humiliate the Japanese. They're the Soviet illiterate peasant conscript force of the Red Army of Workers and Peasants or something like that it was called,
Hmm.
and that's exactly what they were. They managed to humiliate the Japanese. Again, they put proper guns in their tanks, and the Japanese didn't for a start.
Hmm.
But there's obviously more to a fight than just the tanks. So they had the
Yeah.
right supportive artillery. They had the correct maneuver. There's this misconception that Zhukov did a deep battle. No, he just did a classic double envelopment. I mean, it's like a modern Cannae that any general worth of salt would have tried to
Mhm.
strive for.
And that was
But
later on anyway, right?
yeah,
Where
yeah.
the industry had shown up, it had been pulled back to the Urals, the factories had been
No, no, no,
tilted
no,
up
no,
again.
no, no.
Oh,
This
no?
this
Oh,
is
okay. Oh,
we're talking
at the goal or
1938 here.
whatever. Okay. Okay.
Calcan Goal,
Calcan goal. Okay.
or the Nomohan incident is also known
Okay.
as. So they show that okay, we so far we can defeat pretty much anybody we'll put our mind to, and the French are
Hmm.
the same. They had their Algerian War, for example, and it was fine.
Hmm.
So then they go off and they invade Finland, and Finland is not quite so successful
Right.
because they're going up again. Well, there was less room to maneuver for starters.
Right. One road. Yeah. And the
Yeah,
Finns can come from either side and chop them up. Right.
I mean,
Hmm.
I've been to Helsinki a few times, and as I'm
Hmm.
driving around, I'm just looking at all the roads and the trees, and I'm going, "This is not tank country." I would hate to fight my tank in this
Uh,
country, and it's probably why Finland doesn't have too many tanks. It's only got 60,
hmm.
120, something like that. Well, I say not too many, but it's more than the British Army almost at this point.
Hmm.
Um, so that's where they start realizing that okay, we have some problems, less so on the organizational and equipment side, more so on the decision making and training side.
Okay.
But again, they're not the only ones at this. So after the Germans invaded Poland and they realized, okay, we won, but my God, there were so many things we need to do
Yeah.
better. And they pulled all the battalion commanders, everybody came in for like a 6-month retraining program, after which they invaded France and things went a lot
Hmm.
better.
Yeah. Because
And
they almost ran into the logistics problems, the supply problems invading Poland
it was
that they
more
would
than
run
that.
into later.
There was
Yeah.
all sorts of issues. I
Yeah.
mean, they say this: the winner of war is the side that makes fewest mistakes.
Hmm.
Okay, well, the
Hmm.
Germans made fewer mistakes, but it was still more than they needed to. So why not? So the Soviets had, sat back and they said, okay, look, let's have a solid think. What are we doing wrong? When it comes down to the tanks themselves, most of them are okay. And now they had, for starters, they had a lot of them because part of the plan to revitalize the Soviet economy was centralized production. And we're going to build thousands and thousands of tanks because it will generate, the economy, and it will provide us industrial experience. And
right.
It wasn't so much a military decision per se as it was a domestic policy decision with military tangential benefits. Shall we say. Excuse me. So they do exactly what the Germans do. Is they sit back, they have a thing. Okay, we need to remedy our situation. And what the mistake the Germans made was they didn't assume, or they assumed that the Soviets were not capable of doing this introspection and self-assessment. It's kind of, they couldn't defeat Finland. They're useless. Okay,
right. All I have to do is kick in the door.
Yeah,
right.
we'll evade them in a year and a half. We got time, and they will still be just as bad. So that guess what? The Soviets aren't idiots. There were a couple of vehicles that were okay. They failed to meet standard. The T-28 medium tank was another of those multi-turret things that just did not work out. The T-35 heavy tank, a monster of a multi-turreted land battleship, didn't work out. But they tried a few new vehicles. The KV-1 entered service afterwards, and of course the T-34s. Let's see if we can improve this BT light tank that we have thousands of from that American designer, and they make a T-34 that becomes a very useful tank eventually.
Jason, the Defense Department is requesting our analysis on historical ground vehicle development patterns. They believe it may inform their Project Starshield requirements.
All right, Pebble. So 7 nations, 7 approaches to armored warfare between the wars, each shaped by their own unique constraints and strategic vision.
I have activated Clone 3 to assist with the technical analysis.
Oh boy, tanks! I love tanks. They're like big metal boxes with boomsticks. Right. Well, Clone 3, we're discussing how 7 different countries approach tank development between the wars, based on their unique constraints. These Germans, for instance, focused on combined arms doctrine because of the Versailles Treaty limitations. Oh, speaking of limitations, what about our space tanks' mass fraction? We want maximum payload to orbit. It's not actually terrible. The tyranny of the rocket equation does apply. Right. So we need high structural efficiency. Maybe we use carbon nanotube composites like they're developing for space elevators, or space nuclear thermal propulsion like NERVA.
Clone 3's enthusiasm for nuclear propulsion is noted. I calculate a 73% probability he will suggest strapping a reactor to everything today.
Let's focus on the tactical applications. The Soviets, they were emphasizing heavy armor and firepower because they expected mass frontal assaults, but in space there is no front, so it's truly three-dimensional warfare. Exactly. No up or down. It's like playing 3D chess, but the pieces shoot lasers. Sure. Now, the Americans prioritized mechanical reliability and ease of production. For a space tank, that might mean modular design, like the ISS, standardized docking ports. You could hot swap weapon systems in orbit.
I am detecting anomalous cognitive performance from Clone 3. His stupidity appears to be fluctuating.
Clone 3, what's your take on the British approach? It focused on infantry support tanks versus cruiser tanks. Well, in microgravity, you'd have station-keeping tanks for orbital platform defense and pursuit tanks for intercept missions. Different thrust-to-weight ratios, different armor schemes. Wait, did I just say something smart? Pebble, run a diagnostic on Clone 3. I think there might be... Oh, what if we put tank treads on the space tank? For traction against the space ground? There's the Clone 3 I know.
Diagnostic complete. Clone 3 is operating within normal stupidity parameters. The brief intelligence spike was likely a quantum fluctuation in his neural matrix.
I helped design the neural matrix. It uses quantum entanglement for faster-than-light thinking. That's not how quantum entanglement works at all. But what if we made the space tank really big, like Death Star big? Then it could have its own gravity.
Clone 3 has independently rediscovered the O'Neill cylinder concept. albeit through spectacular ignorance of the square cube law.
Now there you have it. Historical tank development teaches us that space combat vehicles will need to balance propulsion, armor, firepower, and operational doctrine, just like their terrestrial predecessors, but in 3 dimensions with orbital mechanics. Don't forget the most important thing. Cup holders! Astronauts need somewhere to put their tank!
I am scheduling Clone 3 for immediate recycling.
Can we make Clone 4 next? I have so many ideas about space submarines. Mark this analysis complete and forward it to the Pentagon, and maybe delay that Clone 4 project indefinitely.
Understood, Jason. Project Starshield. Analysis transmitted. Clone for development. Postponed.
At least until we figure out how to make them smarter instead of dumber. Well, I mean, you're making a lot of something. You need quality. How do you ensure that you scale up and still make something of quality when we're talking about potential future spacecraft, right? It needs a lot of integration points. You need that central officer, I think, to make sure that everything is fitting together and working well.
So the Soviets used design bureaus, and each, although they all worked for the state, the design bureaus were in competition with each other.
Okay.
And this happened all the way through the Cold War as well. And often, on occasion, what would happen is that the central command up in Moscow will go, okay, design bureau over there, we like what you're doing with that hull shape, but over there, we really like what you're doing with the suspension and engines. So what we are going to do is tell the 2 of you to mesh, and you'll make a joint. Okay. Well, one of you is going to take that and use it in that, or vice versa. A command direction, basically, which wouldn't fly so much today. I mean, it is theoretically possible in the US to do that today. You know, say, okay, we're going to buy the patent of this thing, British Aerospace, and we're going to give it to GDLS to install on their vehicle, so that way they all get lots of money. It can be done, but simply the idea of you take that idea and incorporate it into your vehicle is not easily done in the US. The Soviets could do it. So they had their design bureaus, and they had fairly rigorous testing agencies. I mean, we talk about how the Soviet vehicles were crude, and they were to a very large extent, but they did pass testing. The design was not put into production until somebody in Moscow signed off and said, yes, this vehicle is capable of doing the job we've assigned it. It is capable of being manufactured with the equipment that we have, and it performs the useful function that we need. And if it looks a little bit crude, or if it's going to die after 10,000 miles, we have planned for this in the acceptance trials.
Okay, excellent. I see time-wise, if we cover everything, we're going to be here for probably 2 or 3 hours. So I think, in fairness to you, what I'd like to do is cover the US the way we've been covering, and then maybe hit the highlights of Japan and Italy really quickly, right, and see what we can mine out of that. So the US during the same period, and I hope people are like keeping in mind what was happening with the other countries, Britain, France, Soviet Union, that we've been talking about, and how different the situations are. The U.S. has this interbranch rivalry, or different branches rivalry about who owns the tanks, basically. Patton's trying to build them, and I talked about this in the Freedom's Forge video with Bill Conley. He doesn't have any nuts and bolts, and the quartermaster of the army is like, I can't get any, and he finally has to order some from Sears, from the Sears catalog, to be able to put his tanks together. There's political isolationism. The U.S. has different geographies. So if you're playing around in Arizona, it's totally different than New England, right? And like this, to me, was almost the most difficult set of problems, because at least in Europe, you've got a fairly consistent type of geography, problem, right? Yeah. Germany maybe is sandy and marshy in the east, and a little more, mountainy in the west, or whatever, right? These towns, but for the most part, it's kind of contained. It's nowhere near as large as the U.S. So let's talk a little bit about them, and cavalry trying to motorize, and how we got to Chaffee and armored divisions.
So the infantry only tanks wasn't unique to the U.S., but it was a little bit unique in the fact it was a law. It was more of a policy for the French or the Japanese, which is why the French cavalry had special armored cars, or heavy armored cars, instead of tanks. If you look at it, it's a tank. The automitrailleuse de combat, the Samor S-35, literally translates as self-propelled machine gun for combat. It's a tank.
Yeah.
But in the US, by law, infantry had tanks, period, end of story. So the American cavalry had combat cars when they finally got around to mechanicalization. So the Americans, they had very little time and money for tank development. From the 20s and 30s to buy a few tanks here, a few tanks there, just to see what was technically possible. But they weren't putting any money to actually building any numbers of them, because what was the point? As you say, they're isolationists. The East and West are defended by the U.S. Navy and eventually, after do a little bit, the Army Air Corps. The North and South, well, that was the problem with the Army. But North and South, the terrain up in the Canadian border or down in the Southwest border is not really conducive to mechanized warfare and tanks and things like that. Guys on horses, even today, Border Patrol uses horses. They hadn't invented ATVs back in the 30s.
Right.
But they were also, they still had half a mind as to what happens if we do end up in another major war. But especially the cavalry branch for a long while, especially in the late 30s under her, they were highly resistant to the idea of removing the horse from the battlefield, because the horse could go places that mechanized vehicles could not. And that is not wrong. The question is, okay, well, that's true at the 10 to 15 mile level, but what if you want to move somebody 30 or 40 miles quickly? A horse ain't going to make it. The obvious answer is you will just get a lot of horse transporters. So you get tractor trailers, put the horses in the back, you drive them 100 miles, the horse gets out, swims through the river or whatever, and then and that happened in 1941. The 116th Regiment Horse Mechanized shows up in General Patton's rear in the maneuvers and causes much havoc in the back end of an armor division. But eventually what happens, they realize that, okay, look, yes, a horse can do some things very well, but to a large extent, nothing that a mechanized force can't do one way or another. So if the objective is seize A, and a horse can go straight in a straight line over the mountains, across the river, and then seize A, whereas a mechanized force has to go all the way around, cross this bridge over here, come down, and seize A, why not use the mechanized force? Because it's cheaper, easier, safer, and so on. So the horse died a very slow death in the cavalry. Apparently, the unit I currently command was the last horse cav unit in the army. But
okay,
took it over. They ended up going to Burma and used mules instead. So their problem then is, what do we do with the tank in doctrine? So again, infantry branch, the tank is purely for infantry support. It's an assault gun, for lack of a better term, a Sturmgeschütz equivalent. And they put a little anti-tank gun on top, just in case. Whereas the cavalry, the mechanized cavalry regiment under Van Voorhis and then Chaffee, they were looking purely at cavalry roles. I mean, it was literally mechanized cavalry. It was not, we're going to be in the line of battle, we're going to punch through the front line. It was, we need small, light, fast vehicles to go long distances and do exploitation and things like that. And a separate branch of the cavalry was more along the lines of reconnaissance.
Okay.
And that was what the horse cavalry was really focused on. Whilst the 7th Mech was doing the exploitation, reconnaissance, and so on, was horse cavalry with armored cars in particular. Everybody saw the value in armored cars, not least because you could easily attach a radio to it, and you could radio around, or to the airplane, because the signal corps is flying airplanes overhead. So the horse was going to be an integral part of a flesh and mechanized organization. So eventually, after a series of war games, they realized, okay, look, this tank thing, we need to come to a common conclusion on this. And the problem was that infantry were so wedded to the idea of the tank being an infantry weapon, and cavalry were so opposed to the idea of getting rid of horses in favor of armor, and artillery kind of couldn't care one way or the other. They decided the only answer was, we were going to make an entirely new organization called Armored Force, And we're not going to invite infantry to partake. We're not going to invite cavalry to partake, and they weren't even invited to the meeting where this was decided. And we're going to make armored force, and these tank units are either going to be, in the case of the GHQ tank battalions, primarily for infantry support, or in the case of the armored divisions, for exploitation purposes. But they're all going to use the same equipment. We're not going to have an infantry support tank and an exploitation tank. We're just going to keep it simple. This one tank will do it all. And well, that becomes the M3, becomes the M4, and yeah, there we are. Again, I can't remember if I answered the question or not.
Yeah. Well, we just wanted to take a look at what was happening there. So from that, we see that the U.S. is well behind the times in learning about these things. They're just dabbling with them. There's this inter-rivalry. Which role do they have? And then they finally decide, okay, we're going to have one multi-use tank to do everything. Are there parallels today where a nation is far behind technologically like this and they're watching other people's designs? I mean, I'm sure it's all over the place. It just jumped to your head. I'm sure people are watching SpaceX and seeing what's happening there.
In the military world or in the space world?
Yeah, let's go with the space world or the military world. Sorry.
To a large extent, that's us in the US right now. Our procurement processes are not fast.
Right.
I mean, so I almost have a semi-facetious opinion that we have so many checks and guards against corruption and excessive spending and so on. We're probably better off just accepting a little bit of corruption and getting what we need faster. I don't know if you caught General Milley a couple of years ago when we were selecting the pistol. So we'd spent $30 million just on the process to select the new pistol to replace the old 9mm Beretta. Right. I said, look, this isn't a space program. Give me a credit card. I'll go to, we're talking about a pistol. I'll go to Cabela's. I'll get a bulk discount on pistols, and I'll get everybody a pistol for the same $30 million.
Right. Or we'll try out 15 and see which ones work for a few bucks. And yeah.
And it's right. I mean, a pistol has a very simple job. Do you really need to spend that much money on and time and years on the acquisitions process? Now, somebody did the math, and it turns out 30 million would not actually fit everybody with a pistol. But the point is made. We spend a very long time, but it does mean to a point that we sit back and we're seeing what are the developments that are happening elsewhere. Obviously, looking at Ukraine, we're looking at who isn't looking at Ukraine, and we're okay. Well, they're coming up with some lessons. Maybe we are going a little bit too high in the high-low ratio. Like we're doing drones that cost millions of dollars that are all singing and all dancing, but it'll still get shot down with a flak shell. As opposed to maybe we need to be doing less capable drones that we can produce by the thousand, and that's a sort of discussion that's currently ongoing.
Yeah.
There was a tangent in the back of my mind now. I'm trying to remember where this was. Countries we're checking, we're looking, U.S. corruption, and no, I do seem to have lost it.
That's all right. Anybody wanting to find out more about our current DoD procurement process, go back a couple of episodes and listen to the discussion between me and Mike Brown, who was the first head of the Defense Innovation Unit. We covered it all, from the development of the McNamara era of 1960s large platform procurement to today with the color of money, how money is spent, yeah, and the fact that we need to improve this process, and Mike has posted a couple of documents on how he would like to go about it.
I have one as well. It's not on my main video list. If you click on live, it's an interview with a couple of general officers involved in the ground combat systems procurement, M10, things like that. Have you ever read the Arthur C. Clarke story, Superiority?
No. I've read Childhood End and a bunch of others of his, but not that one.
So Superiority is a short story. It's maybe 20 pages long. At most, you can read it in half an hour. And the basic premise, it was a war between two cultures. One culture was always going for the greatest thing possible. And they came up with new equipment, with new techniques, which eventually worked. And when it worked fantastically. And then slow and steady swarm will keep going, and eventually the superior, more advanced culture lost.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's very well written.
Okay.
It's a little bit of dark humor as well, but it's freely available online.
Okay.
You can find it easily enough.
Yeah, I'm a Rendezvous with Rama fan, and so it'll be fun to go check out
Yeah.
as well. All right.
Um,
So from this American perspective, probably wouldn't be a good idea to use a wait and see approach with these space vehicles or whatever. You've got to get up there and get something in
you gotta
place.
get something going. And in World War II or before World War II, that decision was made about 1938.
Okay.
1938, 1939, Chief Ordnance said, look, we got to stop developing things. Because it will take time to tool up our factories. It'll take time to get things into the field. It'll take time to learn how to use them, to train the personnel, to get some and to fix the flaws, the inevitable teething troubles that will come with this stuff.
Right.
And his guess was right by stopping in 38, and then have things like the educational orders, which is basically the U.S. government buying equipment it doesn't need at money higher than it needs to pay for it. And if you try that today, there'll be also, again, congressional hearings on fraud, waste, and abuse. But on the other hand, according to Winchester, this saved a full year of the production of the M1 rifle, the Garand rifle, because the government had spent the money it didn't need to spend teaching Winchester how to make the thing. By making, okay, look, we just build 30,000 of these things, Winchester. The unit cost is ridiculously high. We got it. But your manufacturers, your workmen will know how to make this rifle, so that as soon as we say go,
right,
you turn on the taps and you give us lots of rifles. So yeah, you it's absolutely correct. We do have to reach a point that, okay, we got a vague idea where the trend is going. We may not get it absolutely right, but we probably need to get going somewhere now.
Okay.
And again, the Army's doing. You see the announcement last week that we're getting rid of a couple of tank combat brigades being converted to multi-domain functional brigade or multi-domain task forces. The Army is transforming.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, let's finish up with a quick look at Japan and Italy. Very different doctrine development here. Japan is watching. I mean, they were a English ally in World War I, but they weren't on the battlefield so much with tanks. They're watching as an allied observer. They start buying some British and French module designs, but they don't really have a domestic auto industry, which is funny because nowadays, like, look, they figured that out. And they begin designing their own tanks, and they're not that great. They're fighting in China with them. By 1934, they're doing a little combined arms. The Italians come out of World War I understanding mobility and motorization, right? They seem to know that this is the thing that we should be doing. And Italy really got beat up. I mean, they were originally an Axis ally, then they turned right after being neutral at the start of the First World War, and just had some terrible attempts to invade Austria-Hungary, where lots of people died. It was not good. They seem to get into tankettes a lot. They have this war of movement doctrine. And then they get into Italy, invading Ethiopia, and learn a little bit more about that. So let's cover those two and see what we can learn from those from your perspective.
So the short version, the Japanese built their vehicles to spec, and they get a reputation for having terrible tanks for World War II. Yeah. And when you win a Sherman in 1944, and your opposition is a Chiha from 1937, it's going to be a foregone conclusion. I mean, a Chiha was a medium tank by Japanese standards. It was the same weight as a light tank in the U.S. Army. But if you look at the environment that existed in the 1930s when this thing was created, the Chiha, the Hago, and so on, you're talking about jungles or other infrastructure deprived areas. Maybe the port won't hold anything more than 15 tons on the crane. Okay. Even the Americans figured the Americans actually started building cranes to ship overseas, so that the ports, like in Australia, for example, the ports could actually take reasonable cargoes off the ships. And so they had small, reliable, with very good suspension tanks capable of going across country. Did it have a lot of armor? No. But who else in the West, in the Western Pacific had big tanks with big guns that, well, it turned out Russia. Okay. So after No Man Hand, it's kind of like, maybe we need to put a high velocity tank gun in our tanks. And they started with the Shinoto Chi-Ha, for example. The problem was that their industry could never build enough of the things. And that was their bottom line problem was they had the right doctrine. They loved maneuver warfare. Their tanks were well suited for it, but they just couldn't do we shall create this armored division, and they created armored divisions, but they were never up to strength. They never had the equipment to do it. And to a large extent, they're copying what the Germans were doing. Oh, the Germans have half tracks. Well, okay, let's make our own version of the 251 half track, and they do. Can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but they do. Self-propelled artillery. What a brilliant idea! Let's make the Ho-Ri. They make like 4 of them, or 16. So you can't. Maybe I'm mixing up with the Ho-Ri. So their problem was more industrial, and of course you also have the political infighting. The Navy are going, we need lots of steel to build our ships, and having an army that's in the Pacific Islands and you can't get ships to fuel them is kind of pointless.
And they were not talking to each other. These armed forces were quite divergent.
No, this was not a joint chiefs issue. This was
they were not friendly.
It's very much enemy and unfriendly forces. The Italians had a similar issue to one extent in that they had an industrial problem, but a slightly different one. So the fascist leadership were very isolationist in both. Well, I wouldn't say in foreign affairs, but certainly in industry related, and they put massive tariffs on oils and imports of foreign vehicles and so on, which meant that companies like Fiat had the entire Italian domestic market to themselves. So they were able to make things. And that's a part of the reason the Italians had so many light armored vehicles was that they had Fiat. The problem, though, was that whilst the entire Italian market was available to Italy, there wasn't much of a market in Italy because nobody could afford to buy these things. And it just, they weren't selling enough of them. Italy was not an industrialized nation, at least not a motorized nation. In the late 1930s. Yeah, there were cars. Everybody had a few cars. But as a society, they were still kind of rare. Most people didn't understand them, which led to a couple of usability issues. It led to a couple of manufacturing issues, especially when you start, we want to make bigger vehicles. Well, Fiat is making a few trucks, but mainly cars. But, there's a car engine. It's like the British had. There's a car engine, there's a tank engine, and the two are not the same. And the other problem was that Mussolini decided that he wanted his armored divisions early in 1930. We're gonna build thousands of these CV-33s. We're going to fit out our 3 armored divisions with them, or the M1139, and they were in the field. They were ready to go, but the vehicles that they had produced were obsolete. In just a matter of a couple of years. So a couple of years later, they get put into the field against proper tanks, especially like the British Matildas, and they did not come out well. Right. And that wasn't so much a crew issue or a training issue. That was quite simply, we are outclassed in equipment.
Okay. So
not that the Italians didn't have some issues. I mean, but their equipment didn't meet was not up to purpose.
So this is an example of producing too fast.
Yes, it is.
Then, yeah. Because then now what? There's not time to retool and figure this out, right? You could stumble as you go along, but then you need to get rescued by the Germans, I guess. That's step 2.
Yeah, that was part of the other part of it was simply the capacity. So the Italians were able to build a couple hundred tanks, a month maybe, whereas this is an industrial war that some countries are building thousands of tanks a month. So to create those 3 armored divisions, the Italian factories were working for a couple of years. Once the war had started, it was too late. So to a point, Italy was caught between a rock and a hard place. Yeah. They could either have a large, fully equipped force with a doctrine that they believed worked, or they could have a doctrine that believed worked, but only a partially equipped force. There wasn't really a way for them to have both.
And there's a lot of pressure to do things in that Italian environment, right? And we've got to have stuff to show off to the public, right? We need to invade other places so that we can get the Roman Empire back.
And if the train doesn't run on time, we'll send a tank down to the station master's office.
So very, very difficult. So the lesson there for space vehicles, make sure you know who you're probably going to fight, I guess, is an option. Because if the Americans show up and you've created a force that's very good at rolling over Southeast Asian enemies, but now this thing's on your doorstep, you've got a real problem.
That's part of it. I mean, though, the Americans did not set up to fight any particular opponent. They set up to fight a geography. They realized that wherever they'd be fighting, it would not be in North America.
Yeah.
But the army that they created was kind of agnostic as to if they were fighting the French or the Germans or the Americans or the British or the Japanese or anybody else. But they did realize that, okay, whatever we build is going to get on a ship and it's going to go several thousand miles and it's got to fight over there.
And then they're relying a lot more on infantry, I guess, in those situations. Having just watched Hacksaw Ridge for the first time, that was a pretty crazy film.
Well, I mean, infantry is still the core of any force.
Yeah.
I mean, look, even the U.S. Army today, how many infantry divisions does it have versus how many armored divisions or brigades? I mean, we're infantry heavy.
Well, excellent. Well, I appreciate you helping me with this project. It's taken years to get going. I have 11 pages of notes I've been scrolling through on the other monitor. I don't know if you saw. No. Nobody else probably has any idea, but this is a lot of preparation because you did a lot of the preparation, right, of making those videos and looking at the tank doctrines. I highly recommend going to Nicholas's YouTube channel for the Chieftain. And
would it not have been easier for you to simply issue homework? To say, look, here are some links. After watching these videos, here are the questions I want you to consider.
Maybe, but I didn't know exactly what the questions were until you committed to actually being on again. So they were floating around still nebulously. It's like, I think I want to talk about this. So yeah, I think we've covered some fun topics. But again, thanks for doing this. Thanks for your time. And what's the best place for people to go to find out more about you? It's always a great boon to me when you're on. I get a bump in subscribers and that. I'd like to send some traffic back the other way. Just to the YouTube channel?
Not just the YouTube channel, that's fine. I mean, I have Twitter, I have Facebook, I tried Instagram and TikTok. So worth it. YouTube's fine. If nothing else, YouTube is one thing that's monetized. So when you watch a YouTube video, hopefully you might get a few dollars to me.
Okay. That would be great. All right. Thanks a lot, Nick. Thanks for being here.
All right. Have fun.
Thanks for joining Colonel Moran and myself, Jason Canigan, the founder of Cold Star Technologies. Hey, if you're a new president and you've just got into a company, maybe it's not your first rodeo, and you've realized, oh no, the stuff isn't here, the systems aren't here, the dashboard isn't here, the feedback loops aren't here that I expected, and you realize that that's going to cost you that valuable year-end performance bonus that you were promised, you need to talk to us at Cold Star Tech. Go to coldstartech.com/IBI and check out Internal Business Intelligence. This is the tool that we're brought in to work with you on implementing. We don't just give advice and reports and bugger off. We're here to help you earn that bonus. We stick with you. We actually do things. We're a systems implementation company. So check out Internal Business Intelligence by Cold Star Technologies. Also, if you're a founder in the space and defense field or you're considering becoming one, you need to check out my latest book. It's called The Evolution of Space Entrepreneurship, and it contains feedback, advice, all kinds of actual information, not just, opinions from space industry venture capitalists, people who have created successful businesses, folks who have actual experience in the field and know what works and what creates a successful business. I got to tell you, for 5 years now, maybe more, I've been having conversations with sort of proto-founders, and they consistently believe that their technical improvement that they've thought of is the winning idea and it's what makes the business. This is wrong. When I ask them, who's your customer, what's your use case, they typically have no idea. If you're in this situation, you need to get this book. It's on Amazon. It's in Kindle format. It's in paperbook format. Go look for The Evolution of Space Entrepreneurship. It'll change your life. I mean, you need this if you're a founder in the space and defense field and thinking about it. All right, thanks for joining us. You can go to the Cold Star Project website, which is at coldstarproject.com, and I have paid for the development of a database of all these episodes. And primarily this was made for university students like Andy Aldrin's at what he used to be Florida Institute of Technology. Now he's at the Aerospace University in Daytona. But anybody who wants to go in there and just type in a few keywords, it'll come up with the title and link to episodes on YouTube on whatever space and defense topic you can think of, whether it's military spending or ion propulsion, okay? We put a lot of effort into this. We're adding more of the episodes all the time because there are a lot of them. I've been doing this for 5 years now, maybe more. Maybe 2018 was when I started. 2019 was when I really focused on space and defense, and it's been going on since then. All right, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.